So just as a supplementary video on that combined page speed score that we reached before. So we've got our combined page speed scores running, and we've got our load tester running on the VM. So I'll just start that back up. And that's hitting at about 10 requests per second with a fairly low mean latency. So those combined page speed pillars have really allowed the mean latency to drop down when we have that at a 10 requests per second. So the question we have, how far can we push that load tester so that we can see these initial scores come down, or these excellent scores come down potentially? So just for those who are interested in that load testing tool, let's give it a little go. So at the moment we're running at 100, so let's go and change that, and we'll slowly bump the request per second up and see where we can reach that breaking point. So stick with me here and let's give it a go. So first up, I'm going to bump it up to 30 requests per second. We'll probably leave the concurrency of 10 users, so that's 10 users hitting the site at once with 30 requests per second. And we'll see at what point our latency, mean latency bumps up there. So I guess the end goal of all this load testing, if you were to be load testing a production site properly, is to find out your breaking point. So the interesting thing will be is, okay, at what point does with all these page speed factors combined into one for on the homepage, at what point do we find our breaking point? So 30 requests per second, we've gone from around the 70 millisecond mark up to what looks to be 100 milliseconds. So let's just see if that stays stable for a while. Looks like it's going to. And let's jump outside of the VM again and hit the website from the hosted Lighthouse PageSpeed Insights platform. 100. Okay, so we're not really seeing an impact yet. It's all responding pretty well still. Just to confirm that, I think we will confirm that. So we'll just go back. So okay, 100 milliseconds. So it's still, if we were to see that latency start to creep up, we'd be concerned. But the server's responding really quite well to what we've thrown at it so far. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bump it up to 60 requests per second. Restart my test. Here we go. All bets are on. What latency are we expecting to see now? Okay, so doubling that. So creeping up now from 37. Okay, so straight away we've started to struggle a little bit. Let's see if that continues to creep up. Okay, so we've already gone up to a fairly high number straight away. That was somewhat unexpected. So perhaps our breaking point does lie just above the 30 requests per second. And there we see it. So we've started to get some errors creep in. Let's just let that run for a bit more. So errors as a total percentage of total requests is creeping up a bit higher. I'm going to kill that off. Okay, so we went from 30 to 60 fairly quickly. If I drop that down to 40, let's just see if our site can remain stable at 40 requests per second. So starting to stream up now fairly rapidly to that 40 requests per second mark. Almost there already. We're into the mean latency, fairly high, a lot higher than our comfort zone of 200 milliseconds for latency. One second. Okay, so possibly somewhere between that 30 and 40 requests per second lies our breaking point. As you can see, that's starting to blow out. If we give that homepage a load, it's going to taking a little while to respond. And then still loading external resources as well. So, okay, so the number of requests per second is dropping down, so it's just not able to handle quite that 40 mark at the moment. Let's kill that off. Before I do that, just to prove the point on outside the VM, what sort of score are we getting? So I believe after about a few seconds of wait time, Google won't actually give you a score at all. And let's just see if that's the case. Okay, so failed document request. So the server really isn't responding fast enough for Google to allow us to get a score out of that. Okay, so we went up to 40 requests per second. Let's drop that down to 35. Okay, here we go, up to 35 already. Latency is just about where we want it to be. Let's see if that slowly creeps higher or not. And there we have it, it's come down. So very interesting that somewhere between 35 and 40 it seems to break, but let's just see if that doesn't creep higher. Okay, that seems to have stabilized. So with a response time of just over 100 milliseconds, I still expect a fairly good page speed score there, perhaps even unimpacted. Okay, 99. So we are actually, okay, there we go. So reduced server response time. So we have been given a small penalty hit, only a point there, but it's interesting to see that that is impacting us now. Let's try and get that latency score slightly higher without actually getting it out of control. So I'll just pick 37 and hope that we can get that maybe even between the 200 and 300 millisecond mark and get it stable in particular. All right, 136, 150s, slightly higher, still probably not as high as I want to see it so that I can demonstrate that we get a serious performance hit or a serious points hit. Let's bump that up again. Okay, and once again, just adding those few requests per second just tips it over the edge. So whether it's hitting its memory resource limits or that sort of thing, or there's just too many requests getting through to the database at that point, just tips it over the edge. Okay, so as you can see, between 37 and 39 requests, it's quite amazing to see that just that little difference seems to tip it over the edge. Okay, let's let's wind that back because that's already getting out of control. And I'll just drop that back to 38 and see if we can get that, see what our latency drops in at 38 requests per second. $270 already. Be nice if that just stabilised right now. Okay, here we go. $197, dropping down a bit. $192. $212. Okay, it looks as though we've stabilised. So 38 requests per second. I mean, it took us a while, a bit of trial and error to get there, but that looks like it's our limit. Okay, and now the server's starting to giving it slightly too much load. Let's see if it gets out of control here. Okay, stabilizing at 500 now. And dropping down again. Okay, so let's, at least while we've got that half stable, let's try and get a point score outside of the VM here. And as you can see, over that 200 millisecond mark, starting to get penalized a little bit more. Not that much, surprisingly. I think this did used to factor into the algorithm slightly more than what we're seeing here. So it just shows you how this might change over time. Okay, the server's starting to creep up, so we might just let it creep up slowly and then run that again. Okay, taking quite a while, so fingers crossed we even get a score here. Okay, so this is good. Now we're seeing not just the server response time, which was actually probably far higher, but it's actually impacted the time that it takes for CSS resources, that thing. So we're actually seeing some of those resources that are deferred are starting to impact the page speed score quite dramatically, and that's simply because of our server becoming overwhelmed. So it's an important point that once response times overall of the server just responding to assets and the initial time to first byte, the initial page payload, if that's blown out a lot, your Google point score is going to be blowing out as well, or incurring a massive penalty. Let's just give that a look again. So interestingly enough, we've stabilized just under a second response time. It's starting to creep up again. 57. Okay, so slowly but surely the server's responding slower and slower. It's just becoming slightly overwhelmed now. And when it comes to the pillars, it's by far the pillar that has the biggest impact on being able for the server to respond is the rendering cache pillar, which was pillar number 2. So that's what really stops Sitecore from over querying the database and having to retrieve data from the database. That caching pillar puts the rendering cache in memory, and it's able just to fire back a response for when the server's getting hit by load far quicker, as opposed to not having it in the rendering cache. So okay, creeping up quite a bit now, and slowly but surely our server will become unresponsive. So let's just hope it returns us a score at this point. We're really probably pushing the very edges of what Google will tolerate. Oh, 43. Okay. So really getting smashed on some of these external assets now. And on desktop, there we go. Okay, so that was a bit of a run through of how we can use that load testing tool and how too much load will impact and even the server itself is struggling to respond now. Okay. How just putting a bit of load, you can find the limits of your server. It shows how even though if you have all those pillars of speed set up and ready to go, too much load on your server is going to negatively impact your Google PageSpeed Insights score. And so if you're running these scores, if your site's getting overwhelmed all day, every day, 24 hours a day, Google's going to record a fairly low PageSpeed score against your site. And as we know, this score, the Googlebot runs that in the background and it records that in analytics. You can actually see these scores against each page in Google Analytics these days. So they are used as part of the SEO ranking algorithm. All right, that's a wrap on just a supplementary video on how the load impacts that combined page speed score. Thanks for watching.